Hello and welcome to the Sonic Cinema podcast. My name is Brian Scuttle. Thank you for joining me at www.sonic-cinema.com. Also, check out the Sonic Cinema Patreon at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. There you will get some brief write-ups on older movies that I watched for the first time but don't necessarily review for the main site, as well as write-ups for short film blocks like some of the ones at Fantasia Fest 2020, which we will be discussing here, as well as deeper dives into films, into things like Jackie Chan, like the Lonesome Dove series, like the music for Terrence Malick films. And you can find a lot of that at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema, and I hope you enjoy. So this podcast here is going to wrap up Fantasia Fest 2020, which was my third official press film festival experience, and the most unusual because of the fact that due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Fantasia Fest went virtual this year. And I write about what that sort of entails in the blogs that I've written about Fantasia Fest, and it was a really interesting experience. It was rewarding, and I love the fact that they were able to make it as interactive as they were in terms of the live screenings, in terms of Discord, in terms of just a lot of the things that they did. And shout out to the staff at Fantasia Fest for a terrific job of putting on this unusual film festival. I do hope to go in the future. It's in Montreal, so we'll see how that goes. But I definitely would like to experience this in person. It was just a lot of fun to do. And so many props to the staff and everybody who put on Fantasia Fest this year. They did a terrific job, and they made it feel, as much like a community, especially with the Discord and the way they set up the Discord as much as they could. And it was great to be able to interact with other members of the press, people who were just there for certain films, and to just talk about some of the films that we watched throughout the past 2.5 weeks of the festival, though for me it was closer to a month because I started my viewing on July 31st. And that's because of the press access opening around then. And all told, between short films and narratives, I saw 73 films that played Fantasia Fest, whether in the live screenings or the on-demand selections. It was a pretty wide variety of movies, and I really enjoyed the variety. And it's a shame that I couldn't take part in more of the live screenings because of the fact that they had geo-blocked those for Canadians only, but that's fine. As really strange as my first Troma experience was, it was definitely one that I'm glad that I waited to see live as opposed to just getting a screener for it, because of the fact that then I can interact with people on the Discord about the movie itself. And that was a lot of fun. I don't really want to rehash things that I've already written about in terms of the experience of Fantasia Fest. You can read that at sonic-cinema.com. And but what I want to do is sort of give you a rundown of my best and favorites of the festival. And this will probably be sort of the structure for these post-festival podcasts as we move forward into the Atlanta Film Festival this month, and just in general for any film festival I cover, as well as, and you will get a couple more interviews that I did throughout the Fantasia Fest with filmmakers for a couple of the movies that I'm going to list on this selection. And you can read my reviews at Sonic Cinema. They're all marked as Fantasia Fest. And you can, and the ones they did interviews with are all embedded on on the reviews. So I hope you check out those. There are a lot of great discussions with filmmakers and a lot of varied discussions with filmmakers. It was really a wonderful experience being able to interview as many people as I did for this. And you're going to get uh, two more interview sessions in this podcast, and I hope you enjoy those. And I'll tell you when those are coming up. I basically have 10 categories here I decided I wanted to showcase as far as Fantasia Fest. You could say they're my personal awards for the uh, for the festival, and I did this in a way where I go over my 5 best movies of the festival, my 5 favorites, my favorite performances, and my favorite short films. Because actually, all my most of my bests are actually narratives, or feature lengths. And I also have different categories here. They're not necessarily about any technical aspect of the movie in general, but it's about certain elements in these films, and there were really wide variety. And so we're going to start with those, and there are 6 categories. I'm going to go over with that. We're going to start with the best laughs of the film festival, and that's actually going to lead us into the first interview session that you're going to get in this um, podcast. And so for best laughs, for number 3, it's actually Lloyd Kaufman hashtag Shakespeare shitstorm. It's not a particularly good movie, but it was really entertaining, and it was one that I think any social commentary that's trying to make it kind of makes pretty well, and it was just a really entertaining movie, and was one of the funnier movies I saw, even though it's just completely stupid and ridiculous. So number 3 for my best laughs is hashtag Shakespeare shitstorm. Number 2 is a short film by Kay Adelaide and Mariel Sharp, who also worked on another movie you're going to hear about on this podcast. And it's for their short Don't Text Back, which is just a really wonderful little dark comedy on um, women kicking the crap out of toxic masculinity. And I had a chance to talk to Kay and Mariel about the film. And before we go to number 1, I'd like to give you the opportunity to listen to that interview. How did you, what was the inspiration behind Don't Text Back?
Want me to take that one?
Sure.
Great. Basically, what kind of started the idea is just talking to a lot of our women friends who are dating men in Montreal and hearing kind of the same story over and over again, that they've gone out on a date with this guy or 2 dates or maybe 3, and like not thoroughly unimpressed, not a great guy, not a great match. And still feeling really compelled to be in touch with them and answer their text messages, even, and then to kind of get into this weird dynamic with them. And so we have a lot of friends who've been in that situation time and time again. And so this film kind of started out as like a comedic approach to investigating why that might be.
Mm-hmm. And I think I really love one of the things that I really love about one of the things I really appreciate about was the fact that it also it takes on this idea of toxic masculinity and this and basically it does so in a way that gets the point across but isn't just painfully brutal to watch. It maintains that light comedic tone, and but still does get its point across. And that's one of the things with a subject like that. It's kind of hard to hit that balance.
We think we tried to really work on the idea of trying to never seem too mean-spirited. We wanted to keep it kind of more light and easy. So we felt like if there was anything that was too much sort of pointing at one like group of people and saying they're all ridiculous or something, we didn't want to include that. Like, even though there's some fun poked at people who are into new age energy healing and crystals, we're not saying that makes you a bad person. We're just saying everyone's kind of funny in some ways. You know, I think even men in local bands can still see how it's funny to this caricature of Will, and that he's so over the top that nobody really sees themselves in this character.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that is so effective about the film is that it is still rooted in the female experience of it. You don't hear, even though you see her continuing to get the text messages from Will, you never hear from his perspective. You just see her reacting to it. And that's one of the main reasons it works so well, is because of the fact that it stays within her perspective, is more than just trying to do both sides of it.
Thanks for that. Yeah, that's really important to us, I think, as filmmakers, was really to show exclusively the female perspective.
And that, I think, that mirrors sort of our experience, which inspired us in this film, in that most of these really awful men that we hear horror stories about, we never get to meet them. We just hear our friends' interpretations of them, or they'll maybe show us texts or profiles, but it's this kind of mystery man that doesn't have a voice of his own, but his actions kind of speak for themselves.
Yeah. Was there a going back and forth as far as how much of a horror aspect that did you want to add, or was it basically largely comedic, and you were going to have just a few moments of, you know, horror playing into that?
Yeah, I think we did toy around with that a bit. A lot of the choice to not make it as horror, constantly horrifying, was somewhat of a budgetary choice to
work with our shoestring
budget and what we had, kind of, and also for speed, it was a 17-page script when we started, and we shot it in 2 days, so there wasn't a lot of time to do a great variety of effects or extremely dramatic lighting or things like that. So we kind of wanted to play with what our strengths were, which is these two wonderful performers who are great at funny, snappy dialogue, and to sort of make it very dialogue-based. And then by having the ever-present wounded neck, it kind of keeps that genre edge present the whole time.
Yeah, and I like that the ultimate solution to the issue that Kelly is having in the movie is not necessarily an obvious one. I like that there's an element of surprise to that, and then there's still that last minute bit of terror that ultimately brings back this one idea, which I point out early on in my review, that it's like, oh, that's where that comes into play. And it's just really well constructed, and really the type of thing that is it's a great example of doing a strong and even complicated premise in a short amount of time, and it being extremely effective.
Oh, thanks. That's really nice to hear. Thank you.
A lot of these things kind of came up naturally in the writing process. We initially had the idea of there being a Himalayan salt lamp, which is kind of a popular New Age decor item. and that she would smash the locket with that at the end. But then we came up with the joke about the guy problems crystal being this enormous thing later on, and we realized, well, wait, if we have this enormous crystal, why use that? Why not use that instead of the salt crystal? It's solving the guy problem. So, yeah.
No, and it works. It works perfectly in that respect. When does the short play during the festival?
So there's 2 screenings it's on the underground section, and it's playing before the feature film Bleed With Me, which I also produced, and Kay did the special effects on.
Okay.
And it's going to play on the 26th and the 1st of September.
Yeah.
Okay. The 26th of August and 1st of
And I have to say, I have screened Bleed With Me, and I really loved it. I thought it was tremendous. I know a lot of the people who've also screened it, as far as critics, have really enjoyed it as well. Have really liked it as well. That one's one where it does stick with you, and it's one that lingers, and it's like it's another example of where the premise is not quite going where you expect it to go, and the surprise in that and the effectiveness of the horror is it really does a lot with a little, and that's one of those things that's really great to see. So
thank you.
No problem. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it, and I'm glad we were able to talk for a little bit.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this was really fun, and we really enjoyed your review.
Thank you. For number 1 in the best laughs I had for Fantasia Fest, it is Ryan Kruger's just completely ridiculous and awesome and wild dark comedy genre film, Fried Berry. If you get a chance to watch this movie, take the chance to watch this movie. It was really interesting talking to Kruger about the movie, and it's one of the crazier, potentially audience favorite movies to come out of the festival. Was on demand, although I think if people would had a live screening of it, it would have absolutely killed. It would be terrific to watch this with an audience. It's one of the most enjoyable movies I saw at the fest. Even though it's kind of a mess in a lot of ways, it's still really terrific film. So those are my choices for the best laughs. For best action, it actually is going to bring us to the second set of interviews, but I'm going to hold off on those until later, because I do want to have the filmmakers of my number 3 choice in this category, For the Sake of Vicious, to sort of have the last word on Fantasia Fest. And if you read my closing blog about the festival, you know why. But for number 3 for best action is For the Sake of Vicious. Number 2 is Bautran's The Paper Tigers, which is a really entertaining action comedy martial arts movie. Number 1 is Crazy Samurai Musashi, which was in the on-demand selection, and this one is probably a bit controversial, because the big hook of this one is that there's a single 77-minute action scene where the titular samurai goes up against 400 people, not all at once, and you can tell that people are going in and out of frame to, sort of beef up the numbers and stuff. But I really enjoyed the energy of this movie. I really enjoyed the way the filmmakers built tension during the single shot that lasts through most of the movies. and it was one that stuck with me throughout the festival. And so my choice for the best action of the festival was Crazy Samurai Musashi. Next up is Best Terror, which, best horror if you want to look at it this way, but best terror in the sense of the way the filmmakers give us a sense of dread and really build a sense of tension and dread in the film. And these three films all did it in really unique and interesting ways that I couldn't help but get into. Number 3 is The Dark and the Wicked, which is slated for a November release, and I definitely suggest checking it out because it's really it's dark and wicked, and it's entertaining to watch because of both of those elements. Number 2 is The Curse of Audrey Earnshaw, which, if you'll recall, was one of the movies I was most looking forward to going into the festival, and it did not disappoint. It's got a very sinister edge to it as well that is hard to get out of your memory. Number 1 for me is Sanzaru, and this was one that had more of there was a little bit more heart and warmth in this one than the other two, and that's part of the reason that I like it. But one of the things I also really liked about it, and there could have been a couple of other choices in this, is the way Sanzaru uses the very real world struggle with dementia in a way to present supernatural elements to where we're not quite sure whether we're seeing what we're seeing, and how much of that is accurate and true in the reality of the film. And so number 1 for me for best terror is Sanzaru. This one is for best heart, and there are a lot of choices I could have gone with in this one, but the way I'm defining this in terms of best heart is just how strong is the message and how powerful do the filmmakers get in conveying a specific message in this film. And that's why I kind of wanted to represent here with this category. And number 3 is special actors, which you can read the review of on Sonic Cinema, and it's just a really clever sort of Ocean's 11 type heist comedy, but its heart is in a very unique place, which you get to by the end, and it's really the ending really makes up for a lot of some of the film's other shortcomings throughout the movie, and so special actors is number 3. Number 2 for me is the documentary Clapboard Jungle, which is about the struggles of independent filmmaking and independent distribution in the modern era. And Justin McDonald did a wonderful job doing it. It gives me even more respect for filmmakers who are working on that level of independence and struggling with it. And so he captures some harsh realities that really it's hard not to take into perspective when it comes to how certain films are able to get off the ground, and the ones that aren't are it's tough to get a movie off the ground on any level, but especially on the really small independent level, it's very difficult. So Clapboard Jungle is my number 2. My number 1 is Bleed With Me, which we will get to later on. And this one this movie spoke to me on a lot of levels. I could have gone with it for a lot of other ones, but I think the way that Amelia Moses tells this story with her actresses is it gets all of the emotions and all of the pathos that's trying to get to with this story absolutely right. You can read my review, and you can also listen to the interviews that I did with Moses as well as the actresses to talk about the film. And it's one of those movies that sticks with you, and we'll talk about more as this podcast goes along. So next up is best story, which is not the same thing as best screenplay, but just the stories that take twists and turns that you don't necessarily expect, and the stories that really kind of stick with you for a lot of varying reasons. Number 3 for me is a movie that I really kind of loved, and we'll be mentioning again here in this podcast, is Tezuka's Barbara, which is based on manga, and it's an interesting take on film noir that really spoke to me. And I love the images, I love the performances, I love the style and the energy of the movie. It's just very unique for what we typically consider for film noir, but it does have a lot of those same ideas. So number 3 for best story is Tezuka's Barbara. Number 2 is the documentary You Cannot Kill David Arquette. And this one, and you can listen to my interview with the filmmakers on it. It's interesting to see how unexpected a documentary is, and we're going to have another one here soon here coming up that really just took me by surprise and spoke to me on a lot of levels. And the story of David Arquette becoming a wrestler and trying to redeem himself from his earlier years is one of the more disarming stories we've gotten this year, and it's well worth checking out. Whether you're a fan of the actor or not, it's a very great underdog story, and I hope you check out You Cannot Kill David Arquette. My number 1 choice for best story is another documentary. It's called Morgana, which I published a written interview with the filmmakers and the subject, Morgana Muses, who was a housewife, and after her divorce, was at the end of her rope, and she ended up turning to becoming an adult film star. And the story of how she gets to that transition, the way what she's presenting in her films as an adult film star, and the way it's really opened up her life is one of the most surprising narratives I've seen in a good number of years. And it was really great to get some insight on making the documentary from the filmmakers. And I'm very curious to see how larger audiences are going to respond to it. I know the people who saw it at Fantasia Fest really respond to it. And so number 1 for my best story is Morgana. The final one of these type of categories is best vision. And these are basically the movies that have the most unique visions of the festival, and the ones that stand out in ways that they make an impression, and they go places that we don't necessarily expect, and they go to and they say things that are kind of important to say to a certain extent. And all of these films really stood out to me in that respect. Number 3 is Chino Moya's Under Gods, which is a fantasy set in a futuristic, desolate Europe, and it's sort of an anthology film in a lot of ways, and the ways it's an anthology film don't necessarily jibe with the way we're used to thinking of anthology films. But as you can hear in my interview with Chino Moya on with my review, it was a very interesting stream of consciousness project for him, and I think you get that impression in the film, and it's hard to shake the film after you've watched it. I definitely knew I wanted to talk to Chino after watching it, and the discussion was one of my absolute favorites of the festival. Number 2 is Fried Berry. It's just such a crazy and entertaining, weird vision of like a body snatchers type movie, but very darkly comic, and it's unlike anything else you'll ever see from just in general, but from this festival in general, as a whole. So Fried Berry was number 2. Number 1 was one of the movies I was really looking forward to going in, and it was the final film of the career of the life of Nobuhiko Obayashi, and it's called Labyrinth of Cinema. It's a 3-hour-long film. It's a big meal of a movie, but it's well worth checking out. His style was completely unique. His vision is completely original and takes you places that you don't necessarily expect, and it's well worth watching. So number 1 for me for best vision is Labyrinth of Cinema. Before we get to the big ones for the films, I wanted to give a shout out to my favorite performances of the festival. And there were 6 of them, partially because 2 of them go hand in hand because you really cannot have one without the other in terms of a particular film. First up is Fumi Nikaido for Tezuka's Barbara. She is the titular Barbara of the movie, and there's something about her you completely understand from the second she enters the film that why the main character becomes infatuated with her, and it's one of those performances that you are that's instantly memorable and leaves the impression that it's intended to leave whenever you watch it. Next up is Matthew Page for the Paper Tigers, and there are a lot of really fun performances in the Paper Tigers. But Matthew Page is one of those scene-stealing performances that you just can't help but remember. And he has a moment halfway through the film that is so just awesomely hilarious that you kind of need to watch the movie, which is well worth watching anyway, for that scene alone. And so Matthew Page for Paper Tigers is next. The next 2 are the ones I was talking about as far as you can't really have one without the other, is Lee Marshall and Lauren Beatty for Bleed With Me. And this movie made an impression. It really did make an impression on me, and the way that the 2 actresses build their characters, and the way they play off of one another, and the way that the characters themselves need the other one in a way that is almost, you don't necessarily hear it throughout most of the movie, but you feel it throughout the most of the movie. It's a credit to how well they, how much thought they put into their characters and how well they work together. So it's Lee Marshall and Lauren Beatty for Bleed With Me. Next up is Gary Green for Fried Berry. He is Barry in the film, and it is one of the great purely physical performances I've seen in a good long while. And he doesn't say much And for somebody playing an alien stuck in a in the body of kind of a bastard, he does a phenomenal job. This was his first film, as Kruger mentioned, and it's he sells it completely, and he's a big reason why the movie works the way it does. My favorite performance, and the one that is probably the one that I come out thinking the most about in Fantasia Fest, is Katja Herbers from The Columnist. She plays the columnist in the movie. She snaps the movie into focus in a way that the movie doesn't necessarily do all the time, and it's a fantastic performance. Even if we are not quite sure what the film's trying to say, we feel like we know exactly where she's coming from. And so that was, for me, the best performance I saw in Fantasia Fest. Next up, we have my favorite short films, and I got to see all 4 of the short film blocks, and I wanted to pick at least one from each short film block, and ones that were representative of the overall quality of the blocks in general. And I hope you check these out when they are available elsewhere, whether it's other film festivals or not. The Grave of St. Oran, which is an animated film. The Green Sea, which was part of the short gauge trauma block, and it's about a family living with an abusive stepfather. Your Last Day on Earth, which was a very unusual but beautiful time travel story. Blocks, which was from the Born of Women short film block, and is about a mother who's trying to deal with the stresses of her life. And then my favorite short film of the festival was Reflexion, and it's one where 2 people are communicating with one another, and they're trying to make a connection even when they're not with each other in person. And it's just a really beautifully animated short film, and it was honestly the best short film I saw the entire festival. And there were some really great ones, but Reflexion was my top choice for favorite short films. Next, we have my 5 favorite movies, which is to say the 5 that really stuck out the most to me and really made an impression on me. You'll be familiar with all of these after all of this. For the Sake of Vicious, Tezuka's Barbara, Morgana, Under Gods, and Bleed With Me. And that brings us to the 5 best movies I saw at the film festival. For number 5 is For the Sake of Vicious. Number 4 is Reflexion. Number 3 is The Paper Tigers. Number 2 is the documentary Feels Good Man, which is about the history and legacy and struggles of the creator Pepe the Frog to try to wrestle his creation away from the white supremacists and alt-right that co-opted Pepe. And Bleed With Me was the top choice, my top film for the Fantasia Fest. And it was really wonderful to be able to see a lot of these films. I probably would have been able to see some of them anyway at other film festivals, or just they might have come across my way in general. But being able to see them for this particular group of films was, I think, really great. And it was a really great way for me to sort of wrap up the summer before I went back to work. And so the second interview that you're going to get this podcast is me as part of a roundtable with Gabrielle Kerrer and Reese Evanshen. They are the creators of For the Sake of Vicious. And the reason I wanted to end with this, and one of the reasons that the movie stuck out so much to me, other than how good it is because of the fact that this movie really snapped into focus a lot of the things that we've kind of been missing from cinema as cinemas have been closed in terms of genre, in terms of the types of stories we've been getting. You know, we've gotten a lot of comedies, we've gotten a lot of horror movies, but we haven't really, and a lot of dramas, but we've kind of been missing those thrillers, action movies, science fiction movies, and that's kind of what Fantasia Fest brought back to my movie going year. And For the Sake of Vicious was the film that really kind of made me realize that. And so I wanted to leave off with the filmmakers and what they had to say to the questions they asked them on that roundtable. Thank you very much for checking out the Sonic Cinema podcast. I've got the Atlanta Film Festival coming up. I'm looking forward to that. And then it's basically going to be working towards finishing up the year and whatever this crazy year is going to be. So check out, subscribe to the Sonic Cinema podcast on Apple, Google, Spotify, and subscribe to the Sonic Cinema podcast YouTube channel if you haven't already. And check out patreon.com/Sonic Cinema and continue to follow www.sonic-cinema.com for movie reviews, news, and blogs about movies in general and about things that I recognize in movies that I really kind of love. So thank you very much for joining me today, and I leave you with the directors of For the Sake of Vicious. Thank you very much.
First of all, I really enjoyed the movie. It was a nice reminder of what a solid thriller looks like, because it feels like with everything going on, we haven't gotten too many of those this year. My main question is about the score for the movie, and as a director who's also working on the music, is that something that you were thinking about as you were filming, or did you start to have ideas before in the pre-production process, or how did that process work?
I had a bank of stuff saved up. Just like, when you're making music, you just make stuff and you just bank it in folders, project files and everything. And then certain certain vibes that you're into, certain sounds that you're into. And then I had some stuff saved in a sense. And then before we shot the movie, I showed Reese, and Reese was like, "Oh, that's cool. Like maybe we could throw that in the movie somewhere." And then that just developed. And then I remember on set, sometimes I had like this app on my phone or whatever, and you just between long breaks, you're just jingling around while the mood on set, like it's like an app with like a synths and stuff, little keys and notes and jingles. And then I was able to wire that back to my computer through like this email account, so then I could go home or whatever a month or two later and pull it up and see what was happening. But I had some stuff kind of pre-done, but it wasn't for the film. But then when the film was done, Reese just said, why don't you give it a shot to score it? And I never scored a movie before other than If a Tree Falls, which played in Fantasia 2010. And that was more just like of a weird ambient-y, like scary, drifty, dark noise type score. So I had to like figure out like, oh, how do you score a movie basically, right? Because I'm used to making songs, like tracks, like beats and things. So that was the one thing Reese, like I was making stuff with like beats and stuff, and Reese was like, dude, like you got to take out the beats, you got to take out the drums and stuff, because little too weird. So a lot of the stuff you hear is actually stems from stuff that actually had beats, like drum and bass stuff and like industrial type things. And then, and then, you know, while he was editing the film, he would send me clips. I would edit score stuff to the clips, send it back. And then that was interesting because that became like I had to remove myself as a director, per se. And I trusted Reese fully to, you know, give me direction and guidance with the music. So like he would come over. This is just before COVID hit. And I would sit as the musician or the composer, and he would be the director. And, you know, he would, you know, why don't you try this? Or he would call me with an idea he had for a sound or something like that. And I would try to emulate that later. And then it came pretty quick, actually. I was surprised. I thought it was going to be harder than what it was, but it did take a lot of time because you also want to create original sounds and samples. You don't want to like go and download, you know, movie sound effect packs or whatever like that. So that's where I was lucky, where I had stuff saved, banked up over the years, little knobby synth things or whatever, and then just kind of change them to the edit. Did that answer your question? I don't know if that.
Yeah, it definitely did. Thank you very much.
If you have another one to follow up, I don't know if I answered that fully.
No, I think that's good.
Okay.
I mean, it was a good collaboration. Unfortunately, we had to do a lot of posts during lockdown, which was interesting because then we couldn't go into the sound studio with our post sound and anything. So we had to do everything through emails, text messages, and sending each other videos. But it was actually probably one of the better collaborations I've had with working with a composer. I mean, it helped that co-directed the movie as well. But because I don't edit to score or anything, I just edit dry and kind of picture what I hope the music would be. And it was the first time to work with somebody who actually successfully pulled off exactly what I was thinking in my head. And it was great too, because you could be in the middle of something that you didn't think was working, and I could just get on the phone with him and go, you have like the first 30 seconds of this. Now I needed to do this. Boom, 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 boom. And you go, holy shit, dude. Yeah, I've got that. And then, 20 minutes later, I'd have that and I could put it in the edit. So it was interesting. The cool thing about the score is that when we were shooting the movie and when we were talking about it in prep, we're originally like not going to have barely any score. Like the idea was like, no, we'll play this really real. And then once you saw the movie and how it was coming out, I think, for an 80-minute movie, there's actually like 72 minutes worth of score now. So it's interesting how that plays out. Don't ask about Fantasia.
Well, that's perfectly fine. Working on a movie like this, on a scale of a very pared down scale, technically, I'm guessing budgetarily as well. What are some of the challenges of that?
Picking your battles of where, what you're gonna, like, just basically picking your battles, where you're gonna spend the time on and what's more important.
Yeah, everything on a low budget movie is a fight, unfortunately. It's the wages, I think the thing that kills it for me, it's the amount of time you have to actually make the movie. I've always been a big proponent of you have to try and find a way to get a longer schedule, and I know everybody goes, low budget, shorter shooting schedules, but I'm like, it's impossible to ask anybody to pull off anything of any level of quality in 10 days.
No.
Like, it's not fair to any filmmaker. I don't care who you are, especially when it comes to features. Like, it's just not enough time, especially with the hours and the amount of work you're putting into it. So I think the trickiest thing was trying to stretch past 10 or 11 days to get us to, ultimately at the end, I think we were actually at 18 days because we had a couple reshoots and pickup days. But I think for me, that was the toughest thing. But it's like Gabe said, you're fighting a battle every day because people aren't getting paid enough. It's a tough business, and it's because of the sales markets these days and the amount of content out there. The budgets are just getting lower because movies aren't selling for what they used to. Yeah. So
you're expected to do a lot more with less now too. Yeah. Like our last films had maybe twice as the budget, and that was like 5 years ago. And now, like we said, the times are changing and there's less, especially now.
Yeah, and it's getting harder and harder to, because you're literally having to convince people to work for no money, essentially. Now, don't get me wrong, people did get paid, but compared to what you could get paid doing other jobs, it's a lot, and it's very tiring, and it's, you know, you get to that point of like, I do really love doing this, but at what point do you have to take a step back and be like, I gotta live too, I gotta survive, and yeah, it's just I think all aspects of it, unfortunately, are very difficult. It's really hard to pinpoint one specific thing. On this movie especially, it felt like you were fighting against the budget every single day, which is tough because we've both had individual films that were technically much bigger in scale and done for similar budgets, but when you adjust for inflation and everything, like every year your dollar goes up, and what was, you know, where it used to be $100 would feel like $1,000, now $100 doesn't feel like that anymore, and you could really feel it on this production. That's not to say we didn't have a good time, because we did. There's a lot of days where a lot of laughs, a lot of smiles, but it's getting hard out there, man. So
we'd also have to cheat things too, because like all the motorcycle stuff that you saw in the film, we shot like outside the shooting schedule because it would just require our buddies who had motorcycles, and me and Reese and the cameraman, cinematographer. So we would shoot that like outside the schedule because, you know, you just try to shoot as much as you can not in the schedule, and kind of maybe sometimes not tell the producers that you're doing that, and then you just put it in the movie and then they're happy.
Yeah.
They don't ask questions.
Yeah. And I mean, it's incredibly important for us to do everything as much as we can in camera. I mean, when you watch Vicious, with the exception of the muzzle flashes, like every single effect is done in camera. Squibs, bullet hits, the blood spray, like everything, the fights, you know, and that's really hard to do on a low budget like that. And you have to look at that budget and go, what are we going to sacrifice, and is it worth sacrificing to get this? So yeah.